Deputy President Paul Mashatile faints on stage, rushed to hospital. Deputy President Paul Mashatile was rushed to hospital on Saturday afternoon after fainting on stage, according to a report. State broadcaster SABC News reported that Limpopo Premier Dr. Phophi Ramathuba said Mashatile is fine after the collapse. Mashatile was addressing Nwamitwa Day in Tzaneen in Limpopo. He was addressing the day in his capacity as a chairperson of the presidential task team and was speaking about traditional and Khoisan leaders. The public should not be alarmed by the situation, Ramathuba said. The SABC reported that she suspected it was heat exhaustion that could have led to the collapse. She did not reveal where Mashatile was taken for treatment after the collapse, according to the report. He was taken off the podium by security officers and emergency officials, the public broadcaster reported. IOL has reached out for official comments and the story will be updated once received. Meanwhile, role of monetaries in building democracy cannot be ignored. By Bekim Gomezulu. The issue of monetary groups is an inevitable part of South Africa history and political lexicon. Whether we like it or not, their history is inextricably interwoven with all the narratives about the liberation struggle. The irrefutable fact is what informed Mark Maharaj recently when he was reflecting on the history of the Natal Indian Congress NIC and that of the Transvaal Indian Congress DIC. During his address, Maharaj averred that it is not possible to tell the story of South Africa's struggle against colonialism and apartheid without including the significant contribution of the NIC and the DIC. Expounding the point, Maharaj said that any history that does not include their role will remain fatally flawed. From the historical and political contexts of the liberation struggle, it is difficult to challenge Maharaj's view. Whether the minorities were oppressive minority, as was the case with the witness in the country, or they were the marginalized population, as evidenced in the colored, Indian and Khoisan communities, the bottom line is that it is impossible to write minorities out of the narratives about the beleaguered history of the country. It is known the fact that the struggle for political liberation in South Africa was a long, tedious and drawn-out process which is as old as the first encounter between the white and black people of the country. The interaction between whites and non-whites intensified after 1948. This was in the aftermath of the institutionalization of segregation as government policy through apartheid, which was ushered in by the victory of Dr. D.F. Malan's National Party. The apartheid government reacted with brutality and killed scores of people under the guise of protecting the state. While it is true that many of the victims were the black majority, it is equally true that the lives of the minority groups who supported the liberation struggle were not spared. It is for this reason that the names of Indian and colored leaders such as Yusuf Dadoo, Billy Nair, Dr. Monty Naika, Reverend Elan Boysek and Robert McBride are invoked each time the history of the liberation struggle is recounted. When the Freedom Charter was adopted in 1955, it envisaged a South Africa where people would live in harmony with one another, living a life that would be devoid of any form of discrimination based on race, gender, or class. Implied in the statements was that any specific focus on the existence of minorities would no longer be warranted in a non-racial society. Decades later, the interim constitution of 1993 and the current constitution, which was enacted in 1996, revived the hope of a united South Africa where struggles of the minorities would no longer be necessary because they would be part of the broader South African body politic. Intriguingly, even in the post-1994 era, minorities continue to exist unabatably. Importantly, they constantly argued for the need for their continued existence, citing marginalization and neglect by the current political leadership. Khoisan communities are fighting for their land and the recognition of their indigenous languages. Indian and colored communities complained about their marginalization, which was seeing their support for the ANC declining in each election. The formation of political parties such as the Freedom Front Plus FF Plus and the Patriotic Alliance PA, which define their mandate as that of fighting for the rights of minorities across racial lines, affirms the view that the issue of minorities remain on the South African political agenda. Whether such parties do this as per their claim remains the subject of debate. What is clear is that minorities feel as excluded now as they were under apartheid. During the days of operation, ANC President Dr. John Langalibalele Dube held the view that Indians were in a better position compared to black people. They could call on Indian and Britain and options which did not exist for blacks. The formation of tricameral parliament in 1983 to 1984, including whites, coloreds, and Indian, confirmed Dube's earlier utterances that blacks were in a worse position compared to the two minority groups. But as the liberation struggle continued, blacks, coloreds, and Indians found one another. The Dadu Xuma Naika Pact of 1947, which Maharaj recently cited, confirms the collaboration. Even after the adoption of apartheid as a government policy, the ANC and the NIC joined hands and waged war against the apartheid government until the dawn of democracy in 1994. The revival of the NIC in 1971, which had become defunct, reinvigorated struggle. Thus, it should not come as a surprise that when Nelson Mandela assembled his leadership team in 1994, minorities were part of the collective. This synopsis triggers a couple of questions that are worth ventilating. Among them, what role did minorities play in the liberation of the country? To what extent has that role been recognized and acknowledged in the post-1994 political dispensation? Is this any justification that the continued existence of minorities in present-day South Africa? In addressing the first question, it is critical to reflect on the history of the NIC referred to earlier. This would lead to the conclusion that indeed minorities contribute to the struggle. On the second question, the answer is that the role of minorities has been recognized to a lesser extent. Otherwise, they would not be complaining and drifting away from the ANC. Regarding the third question, in the context of the Freedom Charter and the Constitution, there is no need for the continued existence of minorities. However, given their realities and experiences, the continued existence of minorities is justifiable. They have a role to play. Professor Bekim Gomezulu is the director of the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy, CANRAD, at the Nelson Mandela University. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect the views of the IOL or independent newspaper. And that's it from INJIBS Network. Stay tuned to our celebrity and gossip news.